The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult with your financial advisor. Hi there. My name is E, and this is not your father's 2 cents. Are you dealing with debt? If so, you're not alone. According to the Department of Treasury, the national debt is more than $35 trillion. Now listen to this. The average American is more than $104,000 in debt spread across mortgages, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. Now that's according to Business Insider. Now, judging from these numbers, it seems pretty clear that debt is a bad thing. But is that always the case? Joining me today is Patrick Yono. He's the founder and CEO of SureLife Financial. So, when we're talking about debt, it's usually a bad thing. Are there any instances where it's good?
So, there are a couple instances where debt can be good. One instance is, if it's somebody that, doesn't have their credit established for whatever reason, whether, they're younger or maybe they, just have the spouse have the credit and they don't have their own credit, strong credit score or whatnot. In the beginning, in order to increase your credit score, you can keep a small amount of debt on a credit card, and that will grow your credit score a little quicker.
Okay.
The other reason to have debt, like if we talk about, if you have debt within, a mortgage where some of that is tax deductible, and if you've got a, fairly competitive interest rate, then it's good to have that debt because, for example, now let's say if you had, a mortgage and you got it back when interest rates are low, and let's say you got it at 3%. And then now, with interest rates being higher, you can invest money and make more than that, where that might be some good debt. Plus, you can write off the interest you're paying on your taxes. So that's kind of like a double benefit there.
So I found this survey that found that the average American is more than $104,000 in debt, and that's spread across like mortgages, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. Right. What are your thoughts on that?
What we see across the board is for the average American, what happened over, the last 4 years is that if you add up the rate of inflation over the last 4 years, we're at about 25%, meaning if something costs something in 2020 and 2024, it's increased by about 25%. Well, our salaries didn't increase by that much, right? And, so we have a lot of Americans that are facing, this real problem of, hey, we had a quality of life and a lifestyle that we were living, and all of a sudden doing the same things now that became out of our budget. And some people couldn't respond quick enough to say, okay, well, we need to, maybe cut out this and cut out that. So what happened over these last 4 years, if you look at it, our individual debt has grown astronomically, on top of the fact that during that time, the credit card companies were allowed to, almost double what they were charging in interest. So from a what do we do about it standpoint, it's a lot. It's over the heads of us as individuals, right? This is something that's happening on a much higher level than any power that we individually have to do anything about it. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
There's another thing that I found from LendingTree that said credit card debt reached $1.14 trillion this year, which is the highest it's ever been. What are your thoughts about that? Does that scare you as being like someone in the industry?
This is something where, again, people are incurring debt because they're forced to incur debt because, you live your, it's not like a bunch of Americans started splurging on, and charging a bunch of things on credit cards, and that's why they're in this debt. It was because, we had an issue of really drastic inflation. And then we had an issue of, credit card companies raising their interest rates. So, unfortunately, the people were kind of left, holding the bag of, well, now my credit card debt is going astronomically high because just of interest charges,
Right.
And so I think from a handling it perspective, it's something that, again, it's what can we do about it? It's something that, our government, being the representative of the people, have to put in legislation. The government step in and, put a cap on interest rates for a while, put programs in for perhaps for debt forgiveness, if that's possible. If that's something we've seen that might make sense. There's a lot of different things that they could do, but as individuals, it's one of those things where people will have to say, well, what can we change in our life to really throw as much money as possible at this debt? And it's a tough thing to do when you're, trying to
survive,
keep living.
Yeah. So at the national level, we're more than $35 trillion in debt. Can you kind of explain that a little bit? And I always hear people say, like, well, who do we owe debt to?
Right. So right now, our financial system in the United States is we have federal bank reserves. A lot of people don't know those are actually private entities. They're not part of the U.S. government. The Federal Reserve is a separate entity, owned by. It's a privatized company that we borrow money from those banks. We also borrow money from different countries, different governments loan us money. Independent investors will loan the government money. It's just one of those things where the U.S. has good credit, right? Nobody's worried about the U.S. government collapsing. Therefore, they're able to borrow money from the Federal Reserve, from other countries, from private investors, and that's who we borrow the money from.
Okay, got it. So with the $35 trillion, that's a big number. How do you see that being handled moving forward? And is there that's a big, obviously almost incomprehensible number. How does that impact each person, or does it?
Right, it does, absolutely, and that's something that we as a country have to really focus on, because if you look at the trajectory of the national debt, so what I mean is if we took it and we plotted it out on a graph, if we said, hey, if we start in the 1970s or 80s and kind of plot out what our national debt is, you'd see what would happen is that line would plot out where it starts aggressively going up and up worse as, in the last few years. So meaning, the debt that we incur in a year now, maybe back then we didn't incur that much debt over a 15 or 20 year period. It's growing much rapidly is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
And so from a national perspective, we need to take a look at, hey, what are the implications of this debt growing at an astronomically fast pace now? So we have to have an idea of whether, hey, do we need to cut some spending, eliminate some parts of government that we feel are inefficient, or should we be cutting back on maybe money that we're giving to other countries in order to aid them, so on and so forth. But there's no instance where the national debt will just kind of get wiped away. The government has to have a plan to address it somehow, and that's something that we're kind of in that moment where, yes, this will be a hot button topic in the news, for years to come until they figure out this is what we're going to do.
Do you think it'll climb, get worse before it gets better?
And that is and that's the major issue that we have right now is that the rate at which it's climbing grows aggressively more, as the years pass. So we say, in the last 3 years, it's grown by leaps and bounds versus the previous 10 years before that, and it's just going up and up. That's the scary part of it. It will, unless something happens, we will continue to incur the debt because, a lot of these where they're making payments on the debt, they're really just paying the interest on the debt, right? And then they're incurring more debt. So it's just it's really big web. And bad snowball.
Yeah. Is there like a timeline? Because like when you talk about debt for each person, you might, have 10 years to pay off a loan or something like that. Is there a timeline for the government?
Well, I mean, yeah, there is eventually, there's something that has to be done to address it. But as far as, timelines for, each individual creditors, it's basically whatever for the Federal Reserve, they'll have their own terms with the government. Private investors will have their own terms with the government. So it's not like there's not like an answer I could give you like, we've got 10 years. It's each one is different.
Do you have any examples, or what are some instances where it's okay to take on debt?
So I would say it's okay to take on debt if you are using that debt to generate more revenue for yourself in the future, right? So like if you're somebody that is saying, okay, well, I'm really good at what I do. I want to go out and do it on my own. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about, securing a loan or taking on debt in order for me to, start a business or whatever the case may be. That type of debt where it's like, hey, I know I'm gonna be in debt for a while, but with me doing what I'm doing, it's going to help me earn a better income for myself in the future. That kind of debt's okay, because your plan is you're going to pay that debt off when you get your feet under you, and then all of a sudden you've put yourself in a better position than just staying at a job or whatever the case may be.
Right.
That's good debt.
Do you think the same could be said for like going back to school? Because I have a lot of friends who have talked about wanting to go back, but they're already drowning in the debt that they have, like from a 4-year degree. So yes. I feel like that one's a hard one to kind of deal with because
that one there, each individual. So like if we take your friend as an example, each individual has to sit down and really look at the hard facts and the numbers. So if it's something that an individual say, well, hey, factually, if I obtain this degree, I will factually start earning X amount more because here's the opportunities for that, and this is why I need that degree, and this is how it's going to pay me more money. And then it's just doing simple math. If I'm going to be able to make $10,000 more per year, and then have that, go up with inflation, where I get raises, then is it worth it for me to spend, 20 or 30,000 over a 2 or 3 year period, and then I recoup that money back in 3 years? And if that sounds good to you and that makes sense to you, then you can take on some debt to do that. But it is one of those things where, I tell people, make sure that what you're investing your time and your money in is going to give back what, more than what you're putting into it. You want to create more value for yourself, right?
Right. For people who feel like they're just drowning in debt and they don't know how to get out or feel stuck, do you have any tips or advice for them?
Yeah. So, and this is one of those things where, again, it's when I tell people a lot of what we do is based on, crunching numbers and math. So if you have, let's say, a bunch of credit card debt and you're paying really high interest on that credit card debt, you've got some equity in your home, then it does make sense to say, hey, you know what? I know there's refinancing costs to, refinancing my loan, and then perhaps my interest rate's going to go up. Maybe I got a nice 3 or 4% interest rate on my loan for my home, and if I refinance it, it's going to go up to 7 or 8%. But if you look at the flip side of the coin, if you're carrying a bunch of debt on a credit card that's charging you 25% APR, where you're forking over all this money every month, then it is one of those things where, okay, well, this is the better alternative for me financially, is to say, hey, let's use some of that equity in our home to get these credit card debts paid off, to kind of get our feet under us and make sure that, we can afford things going forward. That is an option. Absolutely.
At the end of every episode, I like to do our 2 cents, but really it's your 2 cents. So what would your 2 cents be when it comes to debt overall?
My 2 cents on debt is that you do want to try to avoid having debt as much as possible when you're thinking about making purchases. Always think about, well, what is the value I'm going to receive from this purchase versus what the cost is going to be. That's the thing you want to always think about. Okay, well, when I talk about value, I say, well, if I buy this one thing, it's going to give me this much value. But if I take that money and I do other things with it, will that give me more value? Will it give me more value in the future? These are things that, especially, the younger generation to think, hey, I know that we have social media and you've got all these things being marketed to you and you can buy this and do that. But think about what is the value it's bringing you and what's it really going to cost you down the line. If it's something that you're going to put on credit, then now you're paying for that months and months, perhaps years. And was it worth the value that you received from that thing you purchased?
All right. That does it for this episode of Not Your Father's 2 Cents. Sources used in this episode will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll meet you back here next week.